A friend recently recommended a VR game that I'd never heard of called Crimen, Mercenary. It isn't the best VR game ever made, it isn't awesome, incredible, and it doesn't make me want to make a blowy face and put it in the thumbnail. I personally found it enjoyable, and it's got some interesting ideas, so I thought I'd make a video about it. So what is Crimen Mercenary Tales? It's a hack and slash adventure game. The gameplay is mostly focused on swordplay, but you also have sections where you need to climb, with some light puzzles and boss fights. The game is wrapped up in individual chapters. The first chapter is from a child's perspective, where you're playing as a kid, rescuing your donkey, and his imagination is creating a little story as you climb up and over a barn and fight some enemies. After this, you end up in a room with other people. You unlock more people to talk to as you do each chapter, and then you walk over to them, give them a high five, and then you're transported to a new location as you now play this character in a different place. It's a clever way to tell these shorter stories, and it gives the developers complete freedom to change up the environments and the look of the enemies without it feeling disjointed. The second level, for example, is in a medieval style village where you end up having to fight a vampire. The third chapter is from a female's perspective in an underground cave fighting skeletons and trying to find treasure in an old Aztec tomb.
How does a large ship end up in a narrow canyon?
Because of a tide?
Aye, perhaps you're right. Wait, that doesn't make any sense.
I don't care.
My main criticism of the game is unfortunately the voice acting and dialogue is pretty bad. It's trying too hard to be funny, and it falls into the cringe way too often. If you can get past this though, then the actual meat of the gameplay is solid. The main element is the sword fighting, and it's quite a nice system. It reminds me of Until You Fall, but it feels more free flowing. It's got a bunch of other cool gameplay mechanics thrown in, which get introduced as you play. It's also not a roguelite, you play through the chapters from start to finish. It's got a parry system where you have to move your sword into the enemy's attacks to block, which opens up the enemy for a strong counterattack. You can swing whenever you want, and you can cause damage, but your attacks are much weaker compared to countering and landing a parry. You can still move around, but your movement speed is much slower. This is to stop you from just using the thumbstick to get in cheap shots and avoid enemy attacks. I actually really like this method, as it's not super scripted, but it's got a strong emphasis on parrying and blocking attacks. It can get pretty challenging as well. They aren't afraid to throw multiple enemies at you at the same time, which you have to block and parry in quick succession. Their attacks also get more elaborate. Early on, they're very obvious and easy to read, but later they start to do fake outs where they'll start to do an attack and then switch to a different direction to try and trick you. They can do multiple attacks that you have to block one after the other before you can attack. They've got large enemies with shields where you have to physically move your body to dodge, as you can't block these heavier dudes. You can then open them up by hitting the shield from a certain angle. Some boss fights have you hitting back things by hitting them in certain directions.
Accept your fate, human!
I love playing football.
It's just a flesh wound.
You have enemies that will fire arrows, which you can block by just holding your sword in front of the arrow, or you can hit the arrow, then it spins into the air and then you can give it a second hit to fly it back at the arrow shooter. Sometimes enemies will throw out things towards you when they die, like a health potion, and other times they'll actually throw a gun that you can grab in midair as it comes to you in slow motion. You then get a couple of shots that you can fire. Bows will fly at you, which you can grab and fire a few arrows back. When the gameplay flows, blocking and parrying enemies, catching a gun, then quickly taking out a couple of bad guys, it feels great. I actually wish that they had more of these slow-mo weapons to catch, because they don't actually happen very often, but when they do, it feels pretty badass. Some people will probably hate this system as they will find it too restrictive, but I don't think every melee VR game needs to be full physics based like Blade and Sorcery. I think something like this with a more structured gameplay loop can be great, and it allows for the developers to set up scenarios where they know where the player will be and what weapons they will get to use. Visually, the game is a mixed bag. You can tell that it was made for the Quest, but it does have some nice looking sections. And overall, I enjoyed the variety that the game has, with each chapter having its own individual story, which makes it very easy to pick up, play a chapter, then move on to something else. I think you're probably going to know from looking at this if this is the sort of game that you're interested in or not. If it is, then I think it's worth adding to your wish list. It's $15 full price, but can be bought really cheap on a sale, and it's going to take you about 3 hours to finish. This isn't an ad or a sponsored video, I just wanted to highlight this game that completely flew under my radar. I also want to give a huge thanks to my Patreon and YouTube members. It's your support that helps this channel make videos like this, which probably won't end up getting many views.